The divorce papers had been signed for 11 months, but Marcus Hale still acted like he owned everything, including her. Elena Vasquez stood in the doorway of her own apartment, her knuckles white around the edge of the door, her pulse a small and frantic thing against the side of her throat. Marcus was inside. He hadn't been invited. He never was, these days, but the landlord downstairs still remembered him from before. From the version of Elena's life she had spent 2 years trying to bury, and had buzzed him up without a second thought. "I just want to see Safa," Marcus said, his voice carrying the particular softness of a man who had learned exactly how much softness it took to seem reasonable. He was standing near the kitchen counter, his hands in his pockets, his jaw relaxed. He was wearing a navy blazer over a white shirt with the top button open. He looked like a man who had come for coffee. He looked like a man who had never once wrapped his hand around a woman's wrist and squeezed until the bones shifted. "You have a scheduled visit on Saturday," Elena said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced steady. "That's 4 days from now. You need to leave." Marcus tilted his head slightly to the left a gesture she had once found attractive and now recognized as the prelude to something dangerous. "I was in the neighborhood," he said. "Thought maybe we could be adults about this." Elena did not move from the doorway. She was 5'4". He was 6'1". She had learned, over time, that the doorway was a kind of strategy. It kept distance between them. It kept the hallway visible. It kept her options open. She had read a book about it once, in the months after she'd finally left. The book said always have an exit. She had laughed the first time she read it and then cried, because she hadn't known for a very long time that exits existed. "Get out, Marcus." Something shifted in his face. The softness receded like tide going out, leaving the sharp, gray rock underneath. "You think you can do this forever?" he said, and his voice had lost its careful modulation now, had dropped into something lower and flatter. "You think you can keep my daughter from me? You think a judge is going to keep siding with you when I get my new attorney involved?" Behind Elena, at the end of the short hallway, a door creaked open. Sofa appeared, 6 years old, dark-haired, wearing a purple dinosaur T-shirt and holding a crayon that had been worn down to a nub. She blinked at the scene in the doorway, her large brown eyes moving between her mother and her father with an expression that was too carefully neutral for a 6-year-old's face. Elena had seen that expression before. It had been there since Safa was 4, which was the year Elena had stopped pretending that staying was the right thing to do. "Daddy," Sofa said, without warmth or coldness. Something cracked quietly inside Elena's chest. "Hey baby," Marcus said, and the softness came flooding back into his voice, miraculous and instantaneous, like a tap being turned. He stepped toward the hallway. "Did you miss me, Marcus?" Elena stepped into the apartment, positioning herself between him and Sofa without making it look like a positioning. "Saturday. 4 days. Please go." He stopped. For a long moment he looked at her over her shoulder, with an expression she couldn't quite name. Something between contempt and calculation. The expression of a man running through his options, finding each one and weighing it. Then he straightened, adjusted his blazer, and smiled. "Fine," he said. "I'll see you Saturday, baby girl." He left. Elena closed the door. She stood with her forehead pressed against the painted wood, breathing through her nose, counting to 10 the way her therapist had taught her. Behind her she heard the soft scuff of Sofa's socks on the floor, and then small arms wrapped around her waist from behind, and Sofa pressed her face against Elena's lower back. "He's gone," Sofa said. A statement, not a question. She said it with a kind of wary certainty that no 6-year-old should have owned, and the sound of it was the thing that finally made Elena's eyes sting. "He's gone," Elena confirmed. She turned around and gathered her daughter up and held her, breathing in the smell of crayons and grape juice and the particular warm sweetness of a child's hair. And she thought, not for the first time, and not for the last, "I have to find a way to make this stop." The problem with Marcus Hale was that he was very good at the appearance of being reasonable. Elena had understood this long before the divorce, but she had understood it in the way you understand something when you are still inside it. Partially, through fog, in ways you can't quite articulate to yourself, much less to anyone else. He had never hit her. She had said this to herself many times, as a kind of argument against her own instincts. "He's never hit me," as if the absence of the worst thing meant the presence of nothing. But he had screamed at her for 40 minutes once because she had forgotten to buy a specific brand of pasta. He had told her, on 3 separate occasions, that if she ever left him she would lose everything: the apartment, custody of Sofa, whatever professional reputation she had managed to build as a graphic designer. He had gone through her phone while she slept, not once but regularly, and confronted her about conversations with friends she hadn't seen in years, demanding explanations for the innocuous and ordinary details of her own interior life. He had made her small, methodically, over a period of years, the way water finds the hairline crack in stone and works at it through every season, until the thing finally splits. The divorce had been his idea, in the end, or at least that's how he'd arranged it. He had accused her of cheating, dramatically and publicly, at a dinner party attended by 8 of their mutual friends. It hadn't been true. But the accusation had served its purpose. It gave him a narrative, a version of events in which he was the wronged party, in which his subsequent behavior was justified by her prior betrayal. Elena had learned this only gradually, as she watched the social architecture of her old life rearrange itself around his story. She had walked out of the dinner party, driven home, packed 2 bags, and taken Sofa to her mother's house. She had filed for divorce the following Monday. The next 11 months had been, there was no other word for it, war. Marcus had hired the most aggressive family attorney in the city. He had filed motion after motion, demanded financial audits, contested the custody arrangement at every turn, shown up at Sofa's school twice despite being explicitly told not to. He had sent long, calmly worded emails that documented his grievances in careful detail, emails that read, to a stranger, as the correspondence of a patient and reasonable man, and that read to Alina as a form of psychological siege. She had a folder on her laptop, 47 emails. She had forwarded all of them to her attorney, a competent but overextended woman named Patricia Osei, who had told Alina, with the exhausted honesty of someone who had seen this particular pattern many times before, that without a documented incident of physical harm, the options were limited. Keep records, Patricia had said. Keep showing up. Keep being the stable parent. Eventually the courts see what he is. Eventually, Alina had thought. Eventually is a long time, as she worked from home now. Freelance graphic design, which paid inconsistently but which let her be there when Safa got home from school, which was the most important thing. She had cut their expenses to the bone. She had moved to this apartment. Smaller, cheaper, in a neighborhood she hadn't known before. And she had started over in the quiet, unglamorous, exhausting way that people start over when they don't have anyone to catch them if they fall. She had one friend in the building, a woman named Rosario, who lived 2 floors up, who was 63 and fierce, and who had brought Alina a pot of soup on her first night in the new apartment, and had told her, without preamble, "You look like someone who needs soup and someone to be angry on their behalf." Rosario had been right on both counts. She had become, in the absence of Alina's scattered and geographically distant family, the closest thing to a village Alina had. It was Rosario who told her about the building across the street. "You know who moved in over there?" Rosario said one evening in late October, leaning on Alina's kitchen counter with a glass of red wine, and the comfortable authority of someone who had lived in the neighborhood for 30 years. "Janet Rise." Alina was stirring pasta on the stove. Safa was doing homework at the kitchen table, tongue pressed slightly between her teeth, pencil moving in careful loops. "Should I know that name?" Elena asked. Rosario gave her a look that communicated the full weight of Alina's apparent ignorance. "You know what they say about the Reyes family. I genuinely don't. Old money. Very old. The kind that doesn't file taxes." Rosario took a sip of wine. "His father ran things. You understand? Things. Various things. Downey took over about 5 years ago when the father died. He's cleaned it up, supposedly, has legitimate businesses now. Real estate, import-export, a restaurant on Alcove Street. But the reputation." She made a gesture with her free hand that communicated both admiration and respectful fear. "People in this neighborhood don't bother that building. They don't even litter in front of it." Elena glanced out the kitchen window. The building across the street was older than hers, stone facade, arched windows, a black door with iron fixtures. There were always men in good suits standing near the entrance, which Alina had registered absently as some kind of security, but hadn't thought about further. "Good for him," Alina said, going back to her pasta. Rosario smiled, said nothing more, and topped up her wine. Elena would think about that conversation 6 days later, when Marcus showed up again. It was a Tuesday. Elena had just returned from picking Sofa up from school, and they were still in the building's small foyer. Sofa pulling off her backpack, Alina checking her phone for a work email. When Marcus walked in through the front door behind them, he had a key. Elena's heart stopped for a moment when she heard the lock, and then she turned and saw him, and the whole intricate architecture of fear and carefully maintained composure that she had built over 11 months shuddered like a structure in a high wind. "I spoke to the landlord," Marcus said. He was holding up the key as if it were evidence. "He gave me a copy. I'm listed as an emergency contact from when you moved in. Did you forget that?" Elena pulled Sofa close without thinking. You're not supposed to have access to this building. The court order says I can't enter your apartment without notice." Marcus said pleasantly. "It says nothing about the building. I had my attorney check." He put the key in his pocket, and his eyes moved down to Safa. "Hey baby, how was school?" Safa said nothing. She pressed closer to Elena's side. Something moved across Marcus's face at that odd. Something that wasn't softness, wasn't calculation, but was older and uglier than either. He looked at his daughter's silence and seemed to receive it as a message. His jaw tightened. His eyes came back up to Elena. "We need to talk," he said, "about the custody arrangement. My attorney has filed a new motion?" "Not here," Elena said. "Not in front of Sofa. Not like this." Then when you don't return my calls, you have your attorney filter everything. I can't even. Marcus. Her voice broke slightly on the word, and she hated herself for it, and then she hated him for making her hate herself. Please, not here. He stepped closer. Just one step. But it was the kind of step that meant something. That had always meant something. That she had learned to read the way sailors read weather. I'm gonna get full custody, he said quietly. And when I do, you're going to regret every one of these games you've been playing. The front door opened. A man walked in. He was tall, not dramatically so, but tall in a way that rearranged the dimensions of the small foyer. Dark hair, close cut. A charcoal suit that had been made for him, not bought. He was probably 38 or 40, with a face that was handsome in the manner of things that have been weathered of. Strong bones. A slight scar near his jaw. Eyes that were such a dark brown they were nearly black. He walked with the deliberate, unhurried quality of someone who had never in his life had reason to hurry. He stopped when he saw the three of them. His dark eyes moved across the table, the woman, the child pressed against her, the man leaning into the woman's space in a way that was not quite touching, but was unmistakably aggressive. He read it in perhaps 3 seconds. Then he looked at Marcus. Is there a problem? He said. His voice was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that had mass to it. Marcus turned. He looked at the man with the expression of someone who has been interrupted mid-sentence and intends to make that clear. This is a private conversation, he said. The man said nothing. He looked at Marcus with a calm, attentive patience that was somehow more unsettling than aggression. The patience of someone who was not waiting to speak but was simply observing, filing away what he saw. Elena recognized him. She had seen him once, 2 weeks ago, from her kitchen window, getting out of a black car across the street, the building-suited men straightening slightly at his approach. She hadn't registered his face clearly at the time. She registered in this building, the man said. He looked at Elena. Are you all right? Marcus made a sound between a laugh and a scoff. She's fine. This is between me and my ex-wife. The man's gaze came back to Marcus with an unhurried precision. I didn't ask you, he said. The foyer was very quiet. Marcus looked at the man the way men look at other men when they are deciding whether to escalate. He found something in the man's stillness, in the particular quality of his attention, that gave him pause. Not fear. Exactly. Marcus wasn't built for fear, but recalculation. Elena, Marcus said, without looking away from the man. We'll finish this another time. He left. The black iron door swung shut behind him. Elena stood for a moment in the sudden quiet, sofa still pressed against her side, her own heart beating too fast. The man looked at her. He has a key to this building. Elena blinked. Apparently. I'm gonna call the landlord. I'll have it handled, the man said. He said it simply, without drama, the way you might say Vile grabbed the groceries. A thing that would be done, because he had said it would be done. I'm Danny Reyes. I'm on the top floor. He didn't extend his hand. He didn't make the moment anything other than what it was. He simply said his name and waited. Elena Vasquez, she said. 4th floor, and this is Sofa. Sofa, who had not spoken during the entire encounter, looked up at Dante Reyes with her careful, measuring gaze. He looked back at her with the same focused attention he'd given everything else else. No condescension, no false brightness, just a genuine noticing. Hello, he said. Hello, Sofa said. Then, after a pause, you made my dad leave. Elena started. I did. Dansova considered this. Okay, she said, with the gravity of someone rendering a verdict. Dante Reyes nodded once, as though the verdict had been received and accepted. Then he moved toward the elevator. He pressed the button, and the doors opened, and he stepped near locks. He said, looking at Elena as the doors began to close. All of them. Then the landlord, Mr. Ferreira, called Elena the next morning to tell her that the key issued to Marcus Hale had been deactivated, all locks in the building had been rekeyed, and a new intercom system was being installed by Friday. He sounded, when he delivered this information, like a man who had been spoken to with great calm and considerable authority. Elena did not ask who had spoken to him. She called Patricia O.C. and told her about the incident in the foyer. Patricia told her to document it, and that the new custody motion Marcus had filed would be heard in 3 weeks. Elena sat at her desk after the call with her hands flat on the keyboard and stared at the screen without seeing it. 3 weeks. She had learned not to think too far ahead. Thinking too far ahead was how you found the abyss, and the abyss was not useful. She thought instead about the next hour, the next task, the next concrete thing. She had a logo design due for a client by Thursday. She had to call Safa's teacher back about a field trip permission form. She had to go to the grocery store. She thought about these things in sequence, like stepping stones across dark water. That afternoon, she took Safa to the small park 3 blocks from the building. A narrow strip of green between 2 streets, with a climbing structure shaped like a ship and a row of benches facing it. Safa climbed immediately and with dedication, as she always did, ascending to the highest point and sitting there with the composed satisfaction of someone who has claimed a summit. Elena sat on a bench and watched her and tried not to think. She climbs like she's angry at the structure. Elena turned. Dante Rise was sitting on the far end of the same bench, which she would have noticed earlier if she had been paying more attention to her surroundings, and less attention to the inside of her own head. He was in a dark jacket and dark trousers, without the full suit. More casual, though casual was perhaps not quite the right word for someone who sat with that quality of contained attention. He was looking at Safal on the top of the climbing structure. She does everything with intensity, Elena said, because it was true. Good quality, he said. They sat for a moment in the kind of quiet that was not quite comfortable and not quite uncomfortable. The landlord rekeyed the building, Elena said. Good. Did you ask him to do that? Dante looked at her briefly. Elena blinked. He said, the whole building. I bought it 2 years ago. I live on the top floor. The rest I rent. A slight pause. If I had known the man had a key, I would have handled it sooner. Elena did not know what to do with this information. She filed it. He's gonna keep coming, she said, not to Dante particularly, more to the air, to the grey October sky. He's filed a new custody motion. He has better attorneys than I do. He has more resources than I do. And She stopped. He's very good at appearing to be reasonable. Dante was quiet for a moment. He was watching Safa, who had descended from the summit, and was now navigating the rope ladder with focused determination. What did he do to you? He asked. Not with prurience, not with the extractive curiosity of someone collecting other people's pain. He asked it the way a doctor asks about a symptomat, to understand the nature of a thing. Elena thought about how to answer. She had answered this question many times, in many contexts, to attorneys, to therapists, to her mother, to Rosario Al, and each time she had found the same difficulty, that the truth of it did not translate well into language, that the things Marcus had done were large in their accumulated weight, but individually unremarkable, that she always ended up sounding either melodramatic or insufficiently damaged, and neither reflected the reality of what it had been like to live inside it. Never hit me, she said, which was how she always started, which she had come to recognize as the wrong starting point, but couldn't seem to find another. That's not what I asked, Dante said. She looked at him. He was still watching Sofa. He made me small, she said finally, over a long time, very carefully. Dante nodded slowly. He didn't say I'm sorry, or that must have been hard, or any of the things people said. He just nodded, as though she had confirmed something he had already assessed. He's not going to keep coming, he said. Something about the way he said it. Not threatening, not dramatic, simply stating, made Elena's throat tighten in a way she hadn't expected. You can't promise that, she said. He turned and looked at her then, for the first time in the conversation fully. His dark eyes were steady and direct, and there was in them something that was not arrogance exactly but was its own kind of absolute. I can, he said. She thought about him that night, after Safa was asleep, which was something she told herself not to do and did anyway. The way you press a bruise. She had enough to contend with. She had Marcus and his attorneys, and the custody motion and the 3 weeks until the hearing, and the tight math of her finances and the deep, structural fatigue of being the only person standing between her daughter and a man who had learned to weaponize the legal system. She did not have room for anything else. And yet, there was something about the way Dante Rise existed in space, something about the quality of his stillness, the directness of his attention, that had snagged in her mind like a thread on a nail. He had looked at her in the park with the same focus he'd given Soph on the climbing structure, and the thing about that look was that it had not felt evaluative. It had felt like being seen, which was a thing she had not felt in a long time. She had spent years with a man who looked at her to find fault, and she had spent the months since in a state of habitual self-concealment, keeping her head down, staying small, presenting a surface that offered nothing to attack. Dante Reyes had looked at her as though she were not small. She turned off the light and told herself to sleep, and lay in the dark thinking about the nature of exits and the possibility of being protected, which were thoughts she had not allowed herself to have in a very long time. She saw him again on Thursday, in the building's small lobby, both of them arriving at the same time from opposite directions. Her from the street, him from the elevator. The new intercom system works, he said. I noticed, she said. Thank you. He held the lobby door for her, and she walked through, and they stood for a moment in the mild November air on the building's front steps with no particular reason to continue the conversation. My attorney says the custody hearing is in 18 days, Elena said. She didn't know why she said it. She said it the way you say things sometimes are. Because you need to put them outside of yourself, because carrying them alone is exhausting. Dante looked at her. As your attorney good? She's competent. She's stretched thin. Elena paused. His is better. Dante reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and produced a card. He held it out. It was matte black with simple white text. A name, a number. Ram Vettel. Elena read. Is he an attorney? The best family attorney in the city. Tell him I sent you. Alina looked at the card. She looked at him. I can't afford the best attorney in the city. You won't be billed, Dante said. I can't accept that. It's not charity, he said. Vital owes me a favor. This is how I'm calling it in. Alina stood on the steps with the card in her hand, feeling the particular complicated discomfort of being helped by someone you don't know how to categorize. She was used to people helping from pity, or from obligation, or from the particular self-congratulatory pleasure of being seen to help. This felt like none of those things. This felt like Dante Reyes had looked at a situation, made a calculation, and was now implementing the result. Why? She asked. He considered this question with the same focused attention he brought to everything. Because you're in my building, he said. And because your daughter's face when she said, "You made my dad leave" was not a face I want to see again. Elena's throat did the thing again. The tightening, the sting behind her eyes, she pressed it back. Okay, she said. Thank you. He nodded once and walked toward the street, and she watched him go, and then she went upstairs and called Raman Vital. Raman Vital was not what she had expected. She had expected someone intimidating, perhaps. Someone with the same contained energy as Dante Reyes, or someone aggressively sharp, the kind of attorney who arrived in rooms like a weapon. Instead, she found a small man in his late 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and a cluttered office full of stacked files, and a framed photograph of 3 dogs prominently displayed behind his desk. He listened to everything. He asked precise, measured questions. He reviewed every email in the 47 email folder. He looked at the documented incidents, the unauthorized visits, the key, the school appearances, all, with the professional focus of someone cataloging material. This man has been given too much rope, Raman said, at the end of 2 hours. He said it without particular heat, the way you state a problem before solving it. We're going to address that. He has. Elena started. I know what his attorney has filed, Ramkin said. I know his attorney. We've met before. A slight, private smile. I know his weaknesses. Elena sat across from him in the cluttered office and felt, for the first time in 11 months, something that was cautiously, tentatively adjacent to hope. She told Rosario about Dante Reyes that Saturday evening. Over the soup Rosario had brought down as she did most weekends. A habit that had solidified without either of them formally deciding on it, which was how the best habits formed. Rosario listened with the alert, assessing attention of someone who had been waiting for this information. When Alina finished, Rosario was quiet for a moment, then said, He called in a favor for you. He said he had one to call in. Lena. Rosario set down her spoon. Do you understand what it means when a man like Dante Reyes calls in a favor? Those are not small things. Those are. You don't spend those on strangers. He said I'm in his building. He bought this building 2 years ago. He has not done this for anyone else in this building. Rosario picked up her spoon again. I'm just making an observation. It's probably just... Don't? Rosario said pleasantly. Don't explain it away. Just notice it. Alina noticed it. She noticed it later that night, too, when she was sitting at her desk working on the logo and heard, from the street below, the sound of a car, and looked down and saw Dante Reyes getting out of the black car and her hands on the keyboard were slightly unsteady. Just a flicker. The next disruption came on a Wednesday, at the window where her light was on. 11 days before the custody hearing. She told herself this meant nothing. And it came not from Marcus but about him. Patricia Osei called. Her voice had a particular quality that Alina had learned to recognize, the careful, measured tone of someone delivering news that they have assessed and found manageable, but that they know will not feel manageable to the recipient. His attorney has filed a character witness list, Patricia said, including... A pause. Including your former colleague Daniela Torres. Alina went still at her desk. Daniela. She's prepared to testify that you had an extramarital relationship during your marriage, which, combined with Marcus's original accusation at the dinner party, creates a narrative off. It's not true, Elena said. Daniela was at the dinner party. She was one of the people Marcus told. She stopped. She was trying to remember who Daniela had been, in the architecture of that old life. A colleague from the design firm where Alina had worked before going freelance. Someone she had considered a friend. Someone who had, in the weeks after the dinner party, stopped returning calls. I know, Patricia said. But character witnesses are character witnesses. It's gonna muddy. Can we counter it? With your own witnesses, yes. But I want you to think carefully about who. Patricia. Elena's voice had dropped into a flat, deliberate register. Is this winnable? A silence. I think so, Patricia said, which was not the same as yes. Elena thanked her and hung up. She sat at the desk with her hands in her lap for 3 minutes. She looked at her hands. Then she got up, put on her jacket, went downstairs, crossed the street, and knocked on the black iron door of the building across from hers. One of the suited men answered. He looked at her. She said, I need to speak to Dante Reyes. The suited man's expression did not change. He said, 1 moment, and went inside, and returned 2 minutes later and held the door open for her. The interior of the building was not what she had expected now. She had expected something that matched the exterior severity, all stone and shadow. Instead, it was warmly lit, with old wood floors and high ceilings, and a distinct lack of the performative luxury she associated with the kind of wealth that needed to announce itself. It was the interior of a place that had been lived in carefully and maintained well. The suited man led her to a room off the main hallway, an office, which was also not what she had expected. Large windows looking onto a courtyard garden, books in 2 languages lining the walls, a mahogany desk that was neither too grand nor too humble. Don Reyes was standing behind the desk when she entered. He had been reading something. He put it down when he saw her. "Sit down," he said, which she did, because she suddenly needed to. She told him about the witness list. She told him about Daniela Torres. She told him about the narrative Marcus's attorney was constructing. The unfaithful wife, the unstable mother, the woman whose judgment could not be trusted. And as she told it, she felt the particular humiliation of having this story being written about her, being used against her, being turned into a legal instrument. Dante listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Daniela Torres," he said. "What do you know about her?" "She's a graphic designer. She works at..." Elena named the firm. "She's been there for 5 years. She and Marcus were friendly at the dinner party. I don't know what he offered her or what he told her." Dante moved to his desk, sat down, opened a laptop. He typed something. He waited, he read. "She has a contract dispute with a client from 2 years ago," he said. "Unpaid fees, approximately 14,000 euros. It's been in arbitration." He looked up. "How do you feel about people being paid what they're owed?" Elena blinked. "Fine, obviously. But my attorney will make some calls," Dante said. "Ramkhan will also know how to depose her in a way that makes her testimony less clean. You can't just..." Elena started, and then stopped, because she wasn't sure how to finish that sentence. She wasn't sure what the end of it was. He hadn't said anything illegal. He'd said that someone would be paid a debt they were owed. He'd said his attorney would do his job. And yet, she was sitting in the office of a man whose family had run various things, for generations, and he was telling her, calmly and without apparent effort, that the problem she had just laid out would be addressed. "What are you doing?" she asked, not accusingly. Genuinely. He looked at her across the desk. The late afternoon light came through the courtyard windows and caught the line of his jaw, the slight scar there. He looked like a man who had been in difficult situations many times and had learned, through repetition, that difficult situations were navigable. "I'm making sure the right thing happens," he said. "I find that often it needs help." Elena looked at him for a long moment. "Tell me something," she said. "Why does this matter to you? Really, not the building, not the favor with Ron. Why does a man like you spend his time and his resources on a woman he met 2 weeks ago in a building foyer?" Something shifted in his face, subtle, but visible, a small opening in the careful containment. "Because I know what it looks like," he said quietly, "when someone is trying to make a person disappear. I have watched it happen. To someone I couldn't help when I was too young to know how." He paused. "And I know what it looks like, and I know what it costs, and I am not in a position anymore where there's nothing I can do about it." The room was very quiet. Elena held this information, turned it carefully, felt the weight of it. There was a person behind his words. A specific, rooted, particular grief. And she recognized grief the way you recognize a weather pattern you have lived through, by its shape, by the way it changed the quality of the air. "I'm sorry," she said, "for whoever you couldn't help." He nodded once, looking at his desk. Then he looked back up at her, and the contained quality had returned, but it was softer now at the edges. "The hearing is in 11 days, he said. Ramkhan is going to file 2 counter motions by Friday. He's also going to request that the court appoint an independent child advocate to interview Sofa. Will that help? A child advocate who interviews Sofa independently will give the court information that neither attorney controls," Dante said. "Given what you've described about your daughter's composure around her father, yes, it will help." Elena thought of Sofa on the foyer floor, pressing against her side. "He's gone." The weary certainty of it. "Okay," she said. She stood to leave. At the door she stopped, not quite turning back. "The person you couldn't help," she said. "Your mother." A silence. "Yes," Dante said. She left. The days before the hearing had a particular texture. Dense and slow, like moving through something thick. Elena worked on her design projects in the mornings, and spent the afternoons either on calls with Ramkhan, or at his office reviewing documents, and in the evenings she read to Sofa, and kept her voice steady, and tried to behave like a woman who had everything under control, because Sofa was perceptive, and could read Elena's fear the way she read everything, precisely, with total attention, and without saying so directly. Sofa had started drawing at the kitchen table in the evenings. She had always drawn. It was one of the constants of her character, this need to render the world in crayon and colored pencil, but lately the drawings had shifted. Less dinosaurs, fewer elaborate fantasy landscapes, more figures. A tall figure with dark hair, a smaller figure beside him, Another figure further away, smaller still. Elena found one of the drawings left on the table one morning after Sofa had gone to school. She stood looking at it for a long time. The tall dark figure had been colored with a black crayon, very deliberately, and something that looked like a cape or a coat. The small figure beside him was wearing purple, Sofa's own favorite color. They were standing in front of a building that was recognizably this one, with its arched windows. The figure in the distance was faded, barely there, rendered in the lightest possible strokes. Elena sat down at the kitchen table. She put her hand flat on the drawing for a moment, feeling the waxy texture of the crayon under her palm. Then she got up, made coffee, and went to work. She ran into Dante in the lobby again on the Thursday before the hearing. This time it felt different than it had before. She had been to his home, had sat in his office, had heard the quiet admission about his mother. The geometry between them had shifted, and both of them registered it without quite acknowledging it. "How's Raman?" he asked. "Good. Intimidating." She paused. "He told me he's been doing this for 30 years and he's never lost a case he believed in." "He hasn't," Dante confirmed. "Do you believe every case you help with?" He thought about this. "I don't help with many cases," he said. "I'm selective." She nodded. They were standing in the lobby, not quite blocking the door, in that conversational no man's land where people stand when they should probably continue walking but don't. "Safa drew a picture of you," Elena said. "She put you in a cape." Something moved in his face, not quite a smile, but its neighbor. A cape or a coat. It was ambiguous. "I'll take the cape," he said. Elena's mouth did something that she recognized, with mild surprise, as the beginning of an actual smile. It had been a while since her face had done that automatically. She pressed it back, mostly out of habit. "I don't know what this is," she said, because she was not built for ambiguity and never had been, which was both a strength and a problem. He looked at her steadily. "What would you like it to be?" The question landed in the space between them and sat there. It was not a flirtatious question, it was sincere, which was somehow more difficult. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I have a custody hearing in 4 days and I haven't been able to think past it." "Then don't," he said. "Think past it after." She looked at him. "And if it goes wrong? If Marcus?" "It won't." She shook her head. "You can't promise that either." He held her gaze. "Elena." He said her name the way people say names when they want the name to carry weight, to hold something specific. "It won't go wrong." The night before the hearing, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark and listened to the building settle and thought about all the ways things could go wrong, cycling through them with the systematic thoroughness of someone who had spent too long living in a state of managed dread. The witness list, the counter motions, the things Marcus would say and the things Marcus's attorney would say, and the way a judge looked at a woman who had left a man who appeared, on paper, to be perfectly reasonable. At 2 a.m., she got up and went to the kitchen and made tea and sat at the table. On the table was Sofa's drawing. Elena pulled it toward her and looked at the tall dark figure with his cape, coat, standing in front of the building that had been her starting over place. She thought about what Dante had said. "I know what it looks like when someone is trying to make a person disappear." She thought about his mother. A woman she knew nothing about except that something had happened to her, and that Dante had been too young to stop it, and that it had left a mark on him that had shaped the direction of whatever help he was able to offer now. She thought about the fact that she had not asked for any of this and that it had appeared anyway, like something the universe had decided she was owed and hadn't been consulted about. She drank her tea. She went back to bed. She slept 4 hours, which was not enough but was more than nothing. To the courtroom was ordinary. That was the thing about courtrooms that always surprised people who expected drama. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, a judge who was a tired-looking woman in her 60s named Honorable Carmen Fuentes, who had almost certainly seen every permutation of this particular human story, and was going to see through whatever performance either attorney staged. Marcus arrived with his attorney, a sharp-suited man named Contreras who had the cheerful aggression of someone who genuinely enjoyed litigation. He and Marcus sat on the opposite side of the room. Marcus was wearing a gray suit and an expression of concerned reasonableness. He caught Elena's eye when she sat down, and the look lasted precisely 1 second, long enough to carry a message and short enough to be deniable. Raman Vital arrived at 3 minutes to the hour, organized and unhurried, and sat beside Elena and put a single manila folder on the table. He said. "No," Elena said. "Good," he said. "Overconfidence is a liability." He opened the folder. "Daniela Torres withdrew as a witness this morning." Elena stared at him. Her arbitration was resolved, Raman said, with the mild tone of a man noting the weather. She felt, upon reflection, that her testimony might have been based on incomplete information. Elena opened her mouth, closed it. Across the room, Contreras was leaning toward Marcus and speaking quietly, and Marcus's carefully composed expression had developed a slight fault line around the jaw. The hearing began. What followed was 3 hours of the most precise legal work Elena had ever witnessed. Ramakant Vidal moved through the documentation with the economy of someone who knew exactly which threads to pull and in which order. He presented the email record, 47 emails, and framed them not as harassment exactly, but as a pattern of pressuring communication inconsistent with the tone of someone who claimed to have his child's best interests at heart. He presented the unauthorized building entry, the key obtained without consent, the school appearances. He presented a statement from the court-appointed child advocate who had spent 90 minutes with Sofa and had written, in the measured language of professional assessment, that the child showed signs of anxiety specifically associated with unscheduled contact with her father, and ease and security specifically associated with her primary residence. He presented, finally, testimony from Elena herself, and this was the hardest part, sitting in the witness chair while Contreras tried, with considerable skill, to reframe everything she said. He was good. He was very good. He painted her as controlling, as obstructive, as a woman using her daughter as a weapon in a grievance against her ex-husband. Elena answered every question. She answered them steadily and specifically, without elaboration or emotion, in the manner Raman had coached answer what is asked. No more, no less. She had practiced for 3 days. She answered 22 questions from Contreras without once giving him what he was fishing for. When it was over, she sat back down and Raman put his hand briefly over hers on the table. A single, firm pressure and then removed it. Judge Fuentes retired to consider. In the waiting room, Elena sat in a plastic chair and stared at the wall. Rampan had gone to make a call. She was alone. Marcus appeared. He came and stood in front of her, just close enough to invade her space without technically doing so. The old precise calculation. His expression had lost the courtroom's careful composure. Underneath it was something rawer, more familiar. "You think you're winning," he said. Quiet, for her ears only, Marcus. She didn't look at him. "You have someone helping you," he said. "I know you do. Raman Vidal doesn't take freelance cases for free." A pause. "Who is he, Elena?" "This man who's decided to involve himself in my family's business." "Don't," she said. "I'm gonna find out?" Marcus said. "And when I do..." "Mr. Hale." And Ramgan Vidal had returned. He was standing in the doorway of the waiting room with his folder under his arm and his reading glasses pushed up on his head and an expression of mild, "I'd strongly recommend," Ramkhan said, "that you not finish that sentence." Marcus looked at him. He looked at Elena. He straightened his jacket. He left. Ramkhan sat down in the plastic chair beside her. "He's rattled," he said. "Rattled men make mistakes." "What if? I've been doing this for 30 years, Ramban said. "I've never lost a case I believed in." He paused. "I believe in this one." The judge's ruling came at 4:47 in the afternoon. The primary custody arrangement was confirmed in Elena's favor. Marcus's access was restructured. Scheduled visits, supervised for a 6-month period pending review, with a specific condition prohibiting unannounced contact with the child's primary residence or school. The motion to expand his custody was denied. Elena sat in the courtroom and listened to the judge read the ruling and felt something she couldn't immediately name. Not joy, exactly, not relief, though both of those things were present underneath. It was something quieter. The feeling of having stood in a place that was trying to swallow her, and found that the ground was still there under her feet. She thanked Rampan outside the courthouse. He pressed her hand, told her to call him if anything changed, and went to flag a taxi with the efficient purposefulness of a man who had another appointment. Elena stood on the courthouse steps in the November gray, and took 3 long breaths and then called her mother and cried for 6 minutes. And then she called Rosario, who said, "I told you," in the warm, fierce, victorious tone of someone who had believed this was possible before Elena had. She did not call Dante Reyes. She went and got Sofa from school and took her for ice cream, even though it was too cold for ice cream, and Sofa ate a chocolate scoop very seriously and asked, "Did the man say you can keep me?" Elena looked at her daughter. "Yes," she said. "I can keep you." Sofa nodded. "Good," she said. "That's the correct decision." Elena laughed, a real one, sudden and unguarded, the kind she hadn't managed in months. Sofa looked at her with pleased surprise, as though she had activated something she hadn't known was there. She found Dante in the building's lobby that evening. She was coming back from the ice cream with Sofa, who was carrying her backpack, and a drawing she'd done at school that day, and a stick she'd found on the sidewalk and considered too interesting to leave. Dante was in the lobby, talking quietly to one of his suited men, who nodded and left through the side door when Elena and Sofa came in. Sofa looked at Dante. "We won," she informed him. "I heard," he said. "Mama cried." "Sofa," Elena started. "She cries when good things happen too," Sofa said with the generous tone of a child explaining a confusing adult behavior. "I've noticed this about her." Dante looked at Elena. His eyes were warm. "I've noticed that too," he said. Elena felt the heat rise in her face, which she hadn't felt in years. The specific, particular warmth of being looked at kindly. She looked at the floor, then back up. "Thank you," she said. "You won it," he said. "Ramton gave you tools. You used them well. I'm going to put my stick in my room." Sofa announced, and walked toward the elevator with the purposeful energy of someone who had a clear mission. Elena and Dante stood in the lobby in the aftermath of her departure. Will he complete? Dante asked, with the ruling. Elena thought about Marcus's face in the waiting room, the raw calculation underneath the rattled composure. For a while, she said. Maybe longer. Ramkhan said the supervised visit condition tends to recalibrate people's behavior. And if it doesn't, then we go back, she said. And Raman goes back with us. Dante nodded. He looked at her for a moment with the attentive, quiet precision she was beginning to recognize as his version of warmth. You said, he began, and then paused. A rare thing, the pause, in a man who chose his words with such economy, that you didn't know what this was. Elena's heart did something complicated. I remember, she said. Have you thought past the hearing? She looked at him. He looked back. This was a man who had grown up in a world of things. Oh, various things are. And who had, apparently, made his peace with that world and built something different inside it. He was not an uncomplicated person. He was possibly not a safe person, in the conventional sense of that word. He was someone who existed in spaces that most people didn't, who exercised a kind of authority that was rooted in something older and more layered than a business card. And he had used that authority to make sure the right thing happened, because he believed the right thing needed help. Yes, she said, I've thought past it. And, she considered. She was not a woman who moved quickly or without deliberation. She had learned at cost the value of going slowly, of reading situations clearly before committing to them. She had also learned at cost the difference between caution and self-protection, and between self-protection and the slow diminishment of closing yourself off from anything that might reach you. I think, she said carefully, that I would like to have dinner. Somewhere, at some point, when there's time to figure out what we are before we have to name it. Something in his face awk, the slight easing around the eyes, the small shift at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but a thing that meant the same thing. Saturday. Saturday. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. He stayed in the lobby. As the doors closed, she could see him still standing there, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the closing elevator doors with the focused, patient attention of a man who was used to waiting for things he had decided to pursue. What happened next was not linear, because life is not linear, and because Marcus Hale was not the kind of man who accepted the outcome of a legal proceeding and recalibrated quietly. It took him 3 weeks. 3 weeks of relative stillness. The scheduled visit with Safa on the first Saturday, which went technically within the parameters of the order, but during which Safa came home quieter than usual and drew more faded figures, and didn't say much about the visit. 3 weeks of no unauthorized contact, no unannounced appearances, no long calmly worded emails. 3 weeks during which Elena had dinner with Dante on a Saturday, and then again the following Thursday, and during which something had begun, slow and careful and unnarrated, a thing that grew in the spaces between sentences and in the particular quality of his attention when she talked about Sofa, about her work, about the person she had been before Marcus had spent 3 years trying to edit her into someone smaller. He listened the way very few people listened off. Not performing attention, but actually attending, tracking the shape of things. He told her, in return, something about himself, the father who had died when Dante was 33, the inheritance of a complicated empire, the years spent distinguishing what was truly his from what had simply been handed to him. He told her about his mother, a woman named Isabella, gentle and clever, who had been in a version of what Elena had been in, and who had not had a Raman vital, or a rekeyed lock, or a custody hearing, and who had spent her last years in a diminished life, rather than the one she deserved. She died when I was 31, he said. They were at a table at the restaurant on Alcalov Street, his restaurant, which Elena had not known until Dante waved off the check, and the waiter smiled with the particular warm respect of someone who has known a person for years. 2 years before my father. She never left him. He paused. I used to think it was weakness. Later I understood it was arithmetic. She had no resources, no network, no one who could offer her what she needed to get out. She was trapped by the specific geography of her situation. Elena thought about arithmetic. She knew that arithmetic. She had done it herself for years. The calculation of costs versus capacities, the accounting of what she had against what she needed. What did your father do? She asked. Dante was quiet for a moment. Everything Marcus did, he said. And some things Marcus didn't. Elena nodded. She understood. I'm sorry, she said, which was the second time she had said it to him and which carried the same weight as the first time. He looked at her across the table. The restaurant was warm, softly lit, and the sound of other conversations filled the periphery. He looked at her with the complete attention she had come to expect from him, and beneath it she could see the specific grief of a man who had watched something happen and had not been able to stop it, and had built his entire subsequent life around the project of not watching that happen again. I know, he said. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held hers. Marcus made his move on a Friday, 3 weeks after the hearing, at 7 in the evening. He had been watching. Elena didn't know this until later. Didn't know that he had retained a private investigator. Didn't know that the investigator had photographed her with Dante on 3 separate occasions. Didn't know that Marcus had spent 3 weeks building a dossier that he had then taken to a journalist he knew from his networking life. A man who wrote a column about money and the people who had it, and who was happy to receive the information that Dante Reyes, son of the late Emilio Reyes, was conducting a relationship with the woman his client had recently divorced. The piece appeared online on Friday evening. It was not a front-page story. It was not even a particularly prominent piece, but it named Elena by name, described her as Marcus's ex-wife, described Dante by his family's reputation, and implied, in the careful language of plausible deniability, that Elena's dramatic legal victory 3 weeks prior might have had less to do with the merits of her case, and more to do with the connections of the man she was seen dining with. Elena saw it because Rosario texted her a link at 7:23 p.m., with a message that consisted of a single word, this. She read it at the kitchen table with Sofa in the bath and her blood going cold. She read it twice. She put the phone face down on the table and sat with her hands flat on the surface, breathing steadily. Then she picked up the phone and called Dante. He answered on the second ring. "I've seen it," he said. "What does this mean?" she asked. She was proud of how steady her voice was. "For the custody agreement. 4. It means Marcus has decided to fight with different weapons," Dante said. "It means he's scared. It means the judge who ruled in my favor is going to read a story implying that her ruling was manipulated." "She's a judge," Dante said. "She ruled on evidence. The article has no evidence. It has implication." "Dante," her voice cracked slightly. "He's going to use this to reopen the case. He's going to say I'm exposing Safa Toe." She stopped. The words had stacked up in her throat and she couldn't get them out in any useful order. "Elena." His voice was calm and direct. Not dismissive, not placating. Grounded. "I need you to listen to me." She breathed. "Okay. I'm going to call Ramcon. And I'm going to make some other calls. And tomorrow morning, that journalist is going to understand that he has published something inaccurate and professionally damaging to himself. And Marcus's attorney is going to discover that his client has committed 3 separate violations of the court order's conduct provisions by commissioning a surveillance operation on the child's primary household." She blinked. "Did Hay, the investigator, was watching the building. He was photographing you in public spaces," Dante said. "But his presence near the building and his photographs of you with Safa on the street constitutes surveillance of the child's primary residence under the specific language of the court order. Ramcon will explain it better than I can, but that's what it constitutes." Elena was quiet for a moment. "How do you know all of this already?" A brief pause. "I knew Marcus would do something when the supervised visit structure was put in place," Dante said. "I had someone keeping Marcus on the building," he said. "I own the building." She sat with this for a moment. The particular ethical texture of it. A man who had systems in place, who moved through the world with that quiet, comprehensive awareness of what was happening around him, who had anticipated this because he had lived long enough and seen enough to know the shape of what people like Marcus did when they felt cornered. "Is this," she started and then stopped because she wasn't sure what question she was asking. "Elena," he said, "I have never, in my life, hurt a person who was not a threat, and I have never used what I have against anyone who didn't first raise a hand." He paused. "What I'm telling you is Marcus has made mistakes. I'm going to make sure those mistakes have consequences, through every legal mechanism available. Is that all right with you?" She thought about it. She thought about the arithmetic her mother had done and hadn't been able to solve. She thought about Isabella Reyes, gentle and clever, who had not had someone with the right kind of arithmetic standing beside her. "Yes," she said. "Good. Go be with Sofa. I'll call you in the morning." She hung up. She went into the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub and watched Safa conduct an elaborate drama with 3 rubber ducks and a toy boat, narrating it in a low, serious voice that rendered all 3 ducks with distinct personalities and a complex dynamic. "Mama," Sofa said without looking up from the ducks. "Yes." "Is something wrong?" Elena said. "Nothing's wrong." Safa looked up from the ducks. She looked at Elena with those dark, precise eyes. "Are you sure?" Elena looked at her daughter, 6 years old, crayon-stained, foam on her wrist from the bath, watching Elena with the careful, intelligent attention of someone who had been reading the emotional weather of the adults around her since before she had language for it. "I'm sure," Elena said. "Some things are being sorted out. The sorting takes time, but I'm sure." Sofa studied her for another moment, then she returned to the ducks. "The blue duck is the leader," she reported. "He makes difficult decisions, but he's fair. Good qualities," Elena said. "Yes," Sofa agreed. "I've been thinking a lot about what makes a good leader." The morning brought 3 developments. First, Ramon Vital filed an emergency motion citing Marcus's surveillance operation as a violation of the court order's conduct provisions. He requested an immediate hearing. Judge Fuentes' clerk called by 10 a.m. to schedule it for Monday. Second, the journalist who had written the piece called his editor at 9:47 a.m. and told him the piece needed to be pulled. He did not explain why to his editor. He explained it to no one. The piece was pulled by 10:15. Elena never found out the specific details of what had happened in the hour between her call with Dante and the journalist's call to his editor. She decided, on reflection, that she didn't need to know. Third, Marcus called her. He called at 11 a.m. on her personal phone, which she let ring twice while she sat at her desk and decided how to handle it. Then she picked up. Elena. His voice was different. Not the soft, careful tone of the courtroom performance, not the raw edge of the waiting room confrontation. It was something else, thinner, uncertain at the edges. The voice of a man who had discovered that the ground was less solid than he'd calculated. Marcus, she said. I want to talk, he said without attorneys. Just now. I want to talk. Elena looked at the wall above her desk, where Sofia had taped one of her drawings, the building, the figures, the faded form in the distance. She had moved the drawing there herself, arranged it carefully. About what? Elena said. About. He stopped, started again. About what happened? About the article. Another stop. It went too far. Elena was quiet. I'm not apologizing for wanting more time with my daughter, Marcus said. But the article. The investigator watching my building, Elena said, in the flat, steady voice she had learned to use. The photographs of Sofia on the street. A silence. I didn't think about that, he said finally. What it would look like. How it would feel, Elena said. To have someone watching your home, watching your child. Elena, do you know what Sofia draws? She said. She draws figures. One of them is always faded, far away, nearly invisible. She's been drawing it for months. She paused. You are teaching our daughter that people disappear. That the world is a place where you have to watch for things to go wrong. She's 6 years old, Marcus. She's 6 years old and she has already learned to track the emotional weather of every room she walks into. The silence on the other end of the phone was long. I know, he said finally. And Elena heard, beneath that underneath the defeated acknowledgement. Something she had not heard from him in 3 years. Something she had stopped expecting. Not manipulation, not calculation, just the hollow sound of a person confronting, at last, what they had actually done. The hearing on Monday, she said. Your attorney is going to get a call from Ron. I want you to listen to what Ramon says, and I want you to think about what Sofia needs. Not what you need, not what winning looks like to you, not how this appears, what your 6-year-old daughter needs. Another silence. Okay, he said. She hung up. She sat at her desk for a long time after that. She was not foolish enough to think that one phone call ended anything all. She had been in this long enough to know that people did not change in a morning, that the pattern ran deep, that Monday's hearing would reveal what Monday's hearing would reveal. But there had been something in his voice, something that had not been there before. Dante knocked on her door at noon. She opened it to find him standing in the hallway with 2 cups of coffee from the place on the corner. Not the bad coffee from the building's lobby machine. Real coffee, in proper cups with lids. He held one out to her. How are you? He asked. Complicated, she said. She took the coffee. Come in. They sat in her kitchen now, at the table where Sofia's drawings were, with the light coming through the window that looked over the street, over the building with the black door where he lived. And they drank the coffee, and Elena told him about Marcus's call, including the part where she had talked about the drawings, which she hadn't planned to say to anyone. Dante listened. He looked at the drawing on the kitchen wall. The figures, the faded form in the distance. She's going to be all right, he said. I know, Elena said. She's going to be she's extraordinary. She's already extraordinary. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. I just want her childhood to have been ordinary. I want her not to have spent it tracking emotional weather. She will have both, Dante said. The extraordinary and eventually the ordinary. They're not mutually exclusive. Elena looked at him. How are you so sure? He looked back at her, and the warmth in his face was quiet and certain, the warmth of someone who had decided something and was at peace with the decision. Because you won't stop, he said, and because you won't be doing it alone. Monday's hearing was brief. Contreras, Marcus's attorney, had clearly been advised to recalibrate. He was less aggressive, more conciliatory. The emergency motion was heard, the violation was acknowledged, and the court issued a formal warning to Marcus with a notation in the custody file. Ramcon presented a proposed amendment to the custody arrangement, more structure, clearer boundaries, a formal communication protocol that routed all non-emergency contact through email. And Contreras, after a consultation with Marcus that was visible from across the room, agreed to the amendment. When the hearing ended and they were filing out, Marcus crossed the courtroom and stopped in front of Elena. Contreras touched his arm. A reflex. The automatic caution of an attorney watching his client do something unscripted. Marcus shook him off. He stood in front of Elena. He was not, for once, performing anything. He was just a man in a gray suit with the particular look of someone who has been brought, by consequence, to the edge of himself. "I'm gonna try," he said. "Tut. I'm gonna try to be better." For her, Alina looked at him. She had spent 3 years married to this man and 2 years fighting him. She knew him the way you know someone you have been in close proximity to for a long time, completely and partially, accurately in some dimensions and totally wrong in others. "She needs her father to be present," Alina said. "Not performing, present." He nodded. "We'll see," Alina said. "Not cruelty, just honesty." He left. Ramkhan appeared at Alina's elbow. "That was interesting," he said, in the tone of a man who had watched many endings and many beginnings and had learned not to trust either prematurely. "We'll see," Alina said again. November became December, and December had its particular quality of compressed time. The days shorter, the evenings earlier, the world contracting around whatever warmth you had managed to build. Alina and Sofa put up a small Christmas tree that Sofa had chosen by walking through the lot with the focused deliberation of a professional, and selecting the one that was neither too small nor too large, but had exactly the shape she had apparently envisioned in advance. They decorated it over an afternoon with ornaments and lights and one paper star that Sofa had made at school, and insisted be placed at the very top, precisely centered. "It has to be perfect," Sofa said. "It is perfect." "Not yet." Sofa stood back and looked at it with her head tilted slightly to the side. Then she reached up and adjusted the star by approximately 3 degrees. "Now it's perfect." Alina looked at her daughter. The tilt of her head, the satisfaction on her face, the certainty with which she knew what perfect meant when she saw it. She thought, "I made this person." Not in the sense of ownership, in the sense of wonder. Dante came for dinner on the second Friday of December, at Sofa's specific invitation. "You have to come for dinner," Sofa had told him, when they'd encountered him in the lobby 3 days earlier. "Mama is making her good pasta. Not the regular pasta. The other one." "Suff," Alina said. "It's the truth," Sofa said. "She makes 2 kinds. Dante had looked at Alina over Sofa's head with the private, contained amusement that was becoming familiar oots. The expression that lived just below the surface of his habitual stillness and surfaced at moments like this, when Sofa delivered an observation with her characteristic precision and lack of editorializing. "I would like to come for dinner," he said to Sofa. "Good," Sofa said. "Friday." He came on Friday. Alina made the good pasta, the one with the slow-cooked sauce, the one that took 3 hours and was too much effort for an ordinary weeknight, but which she had found herself wanting to make. Sofala sat across from him at the small kitchen table, and ate her pasta with the serious attention she gave to all food she approved of, and described to him her current drawing project, which was an ambitious multi-page work depicting what she called the story of the building, a narrative that apparently involved the building itself as a character with a complex interiority. Dante listened to this with total attention. He asked specific questions about the building's character and motivations that Sofa received with delighted seriousness, as though he were the first adult who had properly understood what the project required. After dinner, Sofa was put to bed, a process that involved 2 books, a negotiation about whether 3 stories constituted one too many. It did not, on the grounds that the 3rd was very short, and a final check of the Christmas tree to confirm the star was still centered. It was. Alina came back to the kitchen. Dante had cleared the table, washed the dishes, and was standing at the kitchen window looking out at the December street. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. The line of his back, the shape of his hands resting on the edge of the counter, the particular quality of his stillness, that was never empty but always inhabited. Always the stillness of a person who was fully present in whatever space they occupied. She thought about how afraid she had been, 11 months ago, of ever trusting her own perception of another person again. She had been wrong about Marcus so completely, had misread for so long what he was, that the failure of her own judgment had seemed total, a deep structural problem with her own equipment, something not fixable by calibration but by avoidance. By keeping her distance from any situation where her judgment might be required, she had come to understand, gradually, that the lesson was not your judgment is broken. The lesson was Marcus was very good at being something he wasn't, which was a different thing entirely. Dante Reyes had not, in the time she had known him, been anything he wasn't. "Thank you for tonight," she said. He turned. "I should be thanking you. I haven't had a real meal in a week. You own a restaurant. Having and eating are different things." He looked at her with his direct, steady gaze. "Safa asked me something, while you were doing dishes." "What did she ask?" "She asked me if I was going to stay." Alina went still. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that was her mother's decision," he said, "and that I hoped the answer was yes." The kitchen was very quiet. The Christmas tree lights were on in the living room and cast a warm, indirect glow through the doorway. Outside, someone was walking a dog on the dark street below. Alina crossed the kitchen. She stood in front of him and looked up at his face, the strong bones, the slight scar. the eyes that were nearly black and fully present. She's going to call you something, Elena said, eventually. She's already doing it in her drawings, I think. She just hasn't said it out loud yet? I know, he said. It's a big thing. If you're going to be here, it's a very big thing. I know, he said again. I understand what I'm asking for. She searched his face. She looked for the place where the performance was, where the careful construction of reasonable seeming hid something else. She had gotten very good at looking for that place over the years. She had studied the architecture of false fronts. There was no false front, she said. He put his hands on her face very gently. The way you hold something you don't want to break, and looked at her for a moment with an expression that was quiet and grave and warm. The expression of a man who has carried something heavy for a long time and has finally put it down somewhere it belongs. Okay, he said. He kissed her and she let him, and outside the December city went about its business, indifferent and continuous, while inside the small kitchen of a fourth-floor apartment, something that had been broken was not being fixed all. Because broken things don't get unfixed. They get remade into something that knows where its fault lines are, and is stronger at those places. Something was being remade into a shape that could hold. Christmas came. It came with Sofa's star precisely centered at the top of the tree, with the smell of the good pasta and Rosario's wine, and the particular warm chaos of a small apartment hosting more people than it was designed for. Rosario came downstairs and brought her famous almond cake and her fierce opinions about everything in her loud, genuine laugh that filled the rooms. Ramkin Vital sent a card, handwritten, which said simply, well fought, and was signed with the initials RV Downty, brought a gift for Sofa, a set of professional, grade-colored pencils in a wooden case, which Sofa received with the reverent silence of someone who has been given exactly the right thing. Sofa looked at the pencils. Then she looked at Dante. She had been working up to something for weeks. Elena had seen it, the gradual process of a 6-year-old mind reaching a decision through its own private logic, testing something, preparing. Sofa said, Dante, a pause. Is it okay if I call you something else sometimes? He looked at her. What would you like to call me? She held the pencil case in both hands and thought about it with enormous seriousness. I'll decide, she said finally. When I know what's right, I'll decide, okay, he said. Take your time. Sofa nodded. She opened the pencil case and examined the colors with the focused attention of a professional assessing new materials. She removed a deep blue and a warm gold and held them up. These are going to be very important, she announced, and went to the kitchen table and began. Elena stood beside Dante in the small living room, watching Sofa draw, and felt the particular quality of a moment even as you're in it, is something you will return to later. Not because it is dramatic or large, but because it is the precise shape of what you were working toward, the thing the long difficult path was pointing at, visible at last. He put his arm around her shoulder, and she leaned into him, and they stood in the warm apartment and watched Sofa draw with her new pencils, and Rosario argue with the television about something. And outside the winter city went on doing what it did, snow beginning the first of the season falling past the window in the blue December evening. January brought the first supervised visit under the new arrangement. Marcus arrived at the designated time, a Sunday afternoon, 3 o'clock exactly. He did not buzz up uninvited. He stood at the intercom and pressed the button and waited. Elena let him up. He came to the door and said hello to Sofa, and Sofa, still careful, still measuring, still doing her private arithmetic, said hello back. But she took his hand when he held it out. Elena watched them walk down the hallway toward the elevator, Sofa carrying her backpack and her drawing case and a small stuffed animal she'd decided to bring, and she stood in the doorway with the particular complicated feeling of someone who has been in a battle for a long time, and is now watching the first cautious day of something that might, carefully and with vigilance, be called an armistice. She did not forgive Marcus. Forgiveness was a longer road and she was not yet on it, but she understood, in the way that time and consequence sometimes force understanding, that the war had shifted, that what remained now was something that required navigation rather than combat, and that Sofa deserved to have both her parents be, in whatever imperfect way, present. She closed the door. She went to the kitchen and made coffee, and sat at the table with Sofa's latest drawing spread in front of her. It was a large piece. Sofa had used 3 sheets of paper taped together, depicting the building and its neighborhood, with the street and the park and the people on it, all rendered with the specific attention of a child who has looked at things very carefully for a long time. The building was in the center, the stone facade with the arched windows done in gray and brown. From the 4th floor window a light was on. From the top floor window a light was on. In the street below 3 figures, a small one dark-haired in purple, a taller one also dark-haired, in a coat that was possibly also a cape, and, for the first time in months, a 3rd figure that was no longer faded, no longer barely there. It was still in the distance, still separate from the central group, but it was present, It was a full, solid line. Alina looked at this for a long time. She thought about what Dante had said about her not doing this alone anymore. She thought about what Rosario had said about noticing things. She thought about what Rampan had said about believing in cases. She thought about Sofa, who had given herself permission to draw the distant figure back into full existence. She picked up her coffee cup and held it with both hands and looked at the drawing and let herself feel, without qualification or caveat or the careful management she had spent 2 years practicing, the full warmth of where she was in a kitchen in a building that someone had quietly, methodically secured around her, in a life that was hers, in a story that had been headed somewhere darker and had been rerouted, through a combination of her own refusal to stop and the unexpected, unasked, for presence of a man who had decided that the right thing needed help. Spring arrived the way spring arrives after a hard winter, tentatively at first, in small insistences, a milder morning, a longer afternoon, the particular smell of something thawing. Safa noticed it first, as she noticed most things. "It smells different," she said, standing on the building steps in early March. "It's warming up," Elena said. "No," Sofa said, with the confidence of someone who has precise interior instruments. "It smells like something is starting." Elena looked at her. Safa was looking at the street, her drawing case under her arm, waiting for Dante to come down. They were going to the park, the 3 of them, a Sunday ritual that had established itself over the winter without being formally proposed. He would come down at 10 a.m., and they would walk to the park and Safa would climb and draw and Dante would sit beside Elena on the bench and they would talk or not talk. And it was, Elena had realized, the simplest and most reliable happiness she had found in years. Dante appeared in the doorway. He had a thermos of coffee, which he handed to Elena without being asked, and he looked at Safa with the patient attention she had come to count on. "Ready," he said. Safa considered him for a moment. She had been building toward something for weeks. Elena had seen it again, the private deliberation, the decision being assembled in stages. "Safa," Dante said. She looked up at him with her large, precise eyes. She had the deep blue pencil in her hand and the one she'd said would be very important. "I decided," she said. He waited. "I'm gonna call you Papa Div," she said. "Not all the time, but sometimes, when it feels right." The morning held its breath. Dante looked at Safa for a long moment and Elena, watching his face, saw the thing that lived beneath all his containment out. Saw the specific grief of a man who had grown up watching love diminish under pressure, who had inherited a world that was not gentle, who had spent his adult life building something careful and useful out of complicated materials. She saw all of that and she saw it shift, and in its place she saw something simpler and more fundamental, the face of a person who has been given something they did not know they were still capable of wanting. He crouched down so he was level with Safa. He looked at her straight on. "I'm honored," he said. "Papa D is a very good name." Safa studied him with her measuring gaze for another moment. Then she nodded once, with finality, the decision fully made and filed. "Okay," she said. "Let's go to the park." She walked down the building steps with her drawing case and her deep blue pencil, and Dante stood up and looked at Elena over the top of Safa's head, and the look that passed between them was not dramatic. Was, in fact, very quiet, just 2 people exchanging the acknowledgement of something true. He held out his hand. She took it. They walked to the park in the March morning, in the air that smelled, as Safa had correctly identified, like something starting. The 3 of them moving through the pale early spring light of a city that had no idea, and had no need to know what it had taken to get here. At the park, Safa climbed immediately, and with dedication to the top of the ship structure, and sat there with the composed satisfaction of a person who has claimed a summit. She opened her drawing case and selected the deep blue pencil and began. Elena and Dante sat on the bench below and drank coffee from the thermos and watched, and the morning opened around them like a door. Later that evening, after Safa was asleep, Elena found the drawing on the kitchen table. It was the park. The climbing structure in the center, carefully rendered. At the top, a small figure in purple, sitting very still, looking out over everything from the highest point. Below on the bench 2 figures, side by side, one with a cape coat, one without, both of them looking up. Elena stood at the kitchen table with the drawing in her hands for a long time. Then she carefully set it down and went to the living room window, and looked out at the street, the building across the way with its black iron door, the city beyond it doing what cities do, continuous and indifferent and vast. And she felt, in the middle of all that vastness, the specific, irreducible fact of her own life that she had been made small and had refused to stay small, that she had asked for help and accepted it, that she had stood in a foyer 11 months ago with her heart in her throat, while a man she didn't know read the room in 3 seconds and asked, with quiet authority, "Is there a problem?" And that from that moment something had changed, not all at once, not without difficulty, not without the long exhausting careful work of getting from there to here. But here, she was here, outside. The March night was clear and cold and full of the ordinary sounds of the city, traffic, Voices, the distant sound of music from somewhere. All of it familiar, all of it the sound of a world continuing, which is not a small thing. She turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, and slept, easily, deeply, without tracking the emotional weather. In the apartment that was hers, in the life she had rebuilt from the materials she'd had, in the story that was still being written, word by careful word, in a handwriting that was only hers. ED&D.